All right, approach notes and enclosures. What are they and why are they important? Okay, cool. So a question that I get a lot in master classes when I'm on tour is why can't I get that post-bop, bebop type of sound? What's going on in that music that I'm not understanding? Okay, so, well, obviously one thing that's really important to do is transcription, and that will help a lot. But there's also a mechanical, conceptual, technical element that a lot of times people just don't get. And so even when they do transcribe, they don't understand what's going on harmonically, and they're not able to piece things together. And so it doesn't mean as much to them, and they don't get to absorb as much of the information that they could be getting out of that transcription. So we're going to talk about approach notes and enclosures today, and if you want the sheet music for any of the exercises we're doing, it's going to be available on my website in all 12 keys, ascending and descending, so it will be a great resource for practicing this stuff and following along with the video. So make sure to check that out. Okay, so what are approach notes and enclosures? Well, enclosures are actually a form of approach notes. So in a way, approach notes is kind of the broader category, and enclosures are a specific type of approach notes. So let's talk about what approach notes are first. Approach notes are typically used in chromatic fashion. That's usually when we think of approach notes, although they could technically be diatonic. But typically approach notes would be like going from the 9th or the 2nd, depending on how you want to think about it, chromatically down into the root, like I just did on a B flat major chord, speaking in concert. On that B flat major chord, I played C, B, and B flat, going down chromatically into the root. So that type of sound is what you hear a lot of times. It's what prompted the bebop scale technique, and it's what you hear a lot of times in these classic solos that you're familiar with. And so enclosures are just a little more specific and sometimes a little more complex. Enclosures are just approach notes that wrap around the note. So for instance, if we have a B flat major chord here, we would play B, A, into B flat. That would be wrapping around the chord tone or the scale tone. So approach notes are notes approaching a scale or chord tone, and enclosures are a type of approach notes approaching the scale or chord tone. But more specifically, enclosures move around in terms of the direction and the shape. They move around the scale tone or the chord tone. Okay, so what does it sound like in context? I'll just solo quickly over a B flat major 7 chord using this concept just so you can get the idea of what I'm talking about here. All right, so how can we get that sound? How can we start incorporating that into our improvising? Well, let's do it. Here are 15 exercises to help you really internalize this concept and get the hang of using it in your technique and eventually your soloing. All right, so exercise 1, we're going to start here on C major. We're going to go down chromatically from the root, then back to the root, then move up chromatically into the 2. Then we're going to do that same pattern into the 3. So we're just going up the scale. You can think of it modally. Okay, now we're going to change something a little bit. We're going to play an enclosure with a diatonic note from above getting into the 4. And we're just changing that a little bit because of the spacing of the scale. Now we've only got a half step between the 3rd and the 4th degree. And we'll do that one more time as we get further up. But here's what it's going to sound like on tenor. Then when we go down, that's going to be the vibe. All right, exercise 2. We're going to step up the scale 2 degrees, 1, 2, 3. Then we're going to come back down chromatically into the 2. Then step up another 2. So we're doing that same pattern, chromatically into the 3. And you keep on running with that. So it will sound like this on sax. Then when we go down, same idea, and we just adjust sometimes and wrap around the note when we're coming from the 3rd into the 4th and the 7th into the root, and vice versa. All right, so we're going to start flying through these now. Here we go. Exercise 3. We're gonna go 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 4, 3, and then moving chromatically. On sax. Now going down, we'll just do 1, 2, 3, 2, 1. So we're just changing the diatonic part. Okay, exercise 4, and just a reminder, you can follow along with all of these by getting the sheet music off of my website at the link in the description. But exercise 4, now we're going to start on the 2, so we're not starting on the root. We're going 2, 3, 2, chromatic into 1, and then we go 1, 2, 3, 1, and we continue that shape going up. And now for going down, we're actually going to change the diatonic shape in the later part of the measure just to make it voice lead better. So it's going to go. So it's wrapping around the note that we were approaching right there, and takes us downward instead of upward. Okay, so exercise 5. A lot of times when you hear Hank Mobley, John Coltrane, Sonny Rollins, all the best classic jazz saxophonists, a lot of times when you hear them using this concept, they're adding an approach note when they're going down. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to start on the root and go down to the 5th. It's going to sound a little bit like a major bebop scale because it comes from the same concept. But what's cool about this is we're adding chromaticism in all parts of the scale. And we continue that up the scale. It will sound like this. Then when we go down, okay, exercise 6, we're going to do the opposite of that. We're going to step up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, come back down, and do an approach note into the 2nd degree. And that's going to sound like this when you keep on going. Then when we go down, we're just not going to go as high with the diatonic shape. And that might sound familiar to you if you checked out my last video, 10 warm-up exercises that every jazz musician should know. That's in there. All right, exercise 7, we're going to get into enclosure. So this is going to get a little trickier. So this one, it's going to be 1 scale degree at a time, followed by a 3-note enclosure that leads us into the next scale degree. So this one, it's going to sound like this on piano. Adjusting the enclosure shape here because of the spacing of the scale. On tenor, it's going to sound like this. Then going down, will sound like this. This next exercise, we're going to start from the 3rd, play the 2, and then chromatically enclose the root. Then this is going to be a high concentration of enclosures here. We're going to do one after the other. Then we're going to do a 3-note enclosure around the 4. And then from there, we're going to continue that pattern, going enclosure into root, enclosure into 4, enclosure into 2, enclosure into 5, and so on and so forth. So this one, real tricky, it's going to sound like this. And notice we just changed the shape of the enclosure a little bit when we go from the 3rd to the 4th, and when we go from the root or the 7 to the root, because that's where we have a half step spacing in the scale instead of a whole step. So we just changed the nature of the enclosure a little bit. Again, check out the PDFs online for the easiest way to understand how all this works, so you've got the visual there. All right, now we're going to do one that's a little bit less chromatic in nature. It's going to have the enclosure part, but then it's also going to have the diatonic part. So it's going to sound like this. We start on the 3. That same enclosure that we started the last one with, but then we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 5 and do that shape moving up the scale. Then when we turn it around and go descending, we're just going to change the diatonic shape so it ends up being 1, 2, 3, 1. For the next one, we're just going to do the opposite of that. Now we're just going to play 1, 2, 3, 5, the diatonic shape first, and then we're going to do the enclosure after. Then on the way down, 1, 2, 3. All right, so exercise 11, this is getting really tricky, so make sure to check out the PDF on my website. We're going to do a chromatic approach starting on an upbeat. We're going to start on the and of 4, and 1, and 2, and 3. And the notes are going to be moving chromatically into the 7, and then wrapping around the root. And we're going to continue that shape going up the scale, so it gets really tricky. Here's what it sounds like on tenor. And of course, adjusting for when the spacing in the scale changes, like between the 3rd and the 4th, and the 7th and the root. Then when we go down, this is going to be really tricky, so I'm going to play it nice and slow. We're connecting downwards, we change the diatonic part, going down. Okay, exercise 12, we're starting on another upbeat here. We're going to start on the 2, and we're going to wrap around the root, landing on beat 1. So in order to do that, we're going to start on the and of 3, and 4, and 1. Then we're going to continue in enclosure shape going up the scale. This is going to be a really high concentration of enclosures, and it's going to go by really fast. Turning around the shape, or the spacing in the scale. And so if you do that going up the scale on tenor, it's going to sound like this. Super hip. So now going down, it sounds like this. Okay, so exercise 13, this is actually going to be another one that you can find in my last video, 10 warm-up exercises that every jazz musician should know. So this one actually is going to work off of the arpeggios going up the scale. And what it's going to do is it's just going to add a chromatic approach note into every chord tone of those arpeggios. So again, check out the PDF from my website, instant download. But on tenor, it's going to sound like this. Alright, so for exercise 14 and for the last two exercises here, what we're going to do is we're actually going to change the harmonic motion. So what we're going to have is we're going to have the shape is going to go up chromatically as opposed to up the scale. So we're going to go from the third around the root and then a 1, 2, 3, 5 diatonic shape. This is actually a shape that we had from earlier. And what we're going to do is instead of moving it up the scale, we're going to move it up chromatically. So here's what it sounds like on tenor. Then when we go down, we're just going to do that same exact shape, but we're going to connect downwards. For the last exercise, what we're going to do is we're going to use that same diatonic 1, 2, 3, 5 part in the latter half of the bar. But in the first half of the bar, we're going to change the chromatic enclosure. So we're going to do a 4-note chromatic enclosure into that same diatonic idea. We're using 2 notes from below and 2 notes from above, then down into the note. Then we take that up chromatically. So on the sax, it will sound like this. Then for the descending version of this exercise, we're going to do the same thing that we did in the exercise prior. We're going to take that diatonic shape and change it to 1, 2, 3, 1, which is going to take us downwards. Alright, so there you have it, 15 approach note and enclosure exercises that I really do believe every professional jazz musician should be able to do. This is such a valuable skill set that we're developing here, so make sure to go to my website and download the PDFs. Enjoy those exercises. They're all going to be in all 12 keys, ascending and descending, so it's a really useful practice tool. And make sure to always check out my website for tour dates and my show schedule. I'm always touring all around, and I have people asking me where I'm going to be playing. Sometimes they ask me, and I was just there a couple weeks ago. It was funny. I had an experience. I was playing the Chicago Jazz Festival 2 weeks later. Somebody asked my Instagram inbox, you know, when are you playing Chicago? So, and I was just there. So it's always a heartbreaker when it sees that people miss out on the show. So make sure to go to my website and stay in touch and stay tuned. And you can also check out my Bands in Town page, which always has my tour dates up there as well. So, all right, thanks so much for checking out this video, guys. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time.